In the 30s, the British Empire was the main power of the world. Their fleet dominated the seas, and their empire encompassed a third of the world. During World War II, they fought against Axis alongside the USA and the Soviets. But could the British have fought against USA instead of Germany? For sure, Britain could never become fascist. Their institutions were solid. A march on London would be not possible. But history could have had a different path. Oswald Ernest Mosley, the founder of the British Union of Fascists at the opening of his career, was in the Labour Party and was a brilliant and a charismatic orator, the youngest members ever elected in the British Parliament. Mosley was considered a possible future Prime Minister by many. In the 1924 general election, Mosley was candidate for the Labour Party in Birmingham against the future Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain. He lost for only 77 votes, with many suspicions of electoral fraud. But what would happen if Mosley defeated Chamberlain, gaining popularity among the British public and inside the Labour Party? Thanks to the prestigious victory, Mosley becomes part of the national government formed by Ramsay MacDonald in 1929. The ambitious set of proposals of Mosley, more public control of banking and industries, agricultural development, import restrictions, and a public works program to solve the unemployment are successful, making him even more popular. Mosley becomes one of the leaders of the Labour Party. He will never create the British Union of Fascists. 1935, Labour Party wins the elections, and Mosley is chosen as British Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Adolf Hitler is the Chancellor of Germany. Mussolini is in power in Italy. Stalin is the General Secretary of the Soviet Union. Roosevelt in the USA initiated the New Deal. The Spanish Civil War is beginning. The Chinese nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and communist forces of Mao Zedong are engaged in the Chinese Civil War, while the skirmishes with the Japanese continues. India is part of the British Empire. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and South Africa are British dominions, independent but with strong ties with London. Most of Africa and Asia is part of the European colonial empires. The effects of the Great Depression are still present in all the world. The 20th of January 1936, the king of the British Empire, George V, died. The new king is Edward VIII. Edward is quite sympathetic to Nazi and fascist ideologies. In our timeline, Edward was forced to abdicate because he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had been divorced twice, unacceptable as a queen. But the Prime Minister Mosley, knowing that the king has the same ideas as him and could be a good ally, asked the king not to abdicate. Like Churchill in our timeline, he proposes a so-called morganatic marriage. Edward would be king, but Simpson would not become queen, and any children they might have will not inherit the throne. Now, Great Britain has a king with pro-Nazi sympathies and a prime minister, Mosley, not openly fascist, but quite keen towards fascist ideas. In the United States, some are beginning to see Mosley's rise to power as a threat. Mosley gets to work right away, putting forward his economic program partly inspired to Italian fascism, but the main efforts are in foreign policy. Mosley meets Hitler in Berlin to improve relations with Germany. There is the signing of a trade agreement to increase economic cooperation and a declaration of Anglo-German friendship. Hitler is more than happy. He considers the British to be brothers of the Germans and always was willing to restore the old British-German alliance. Then Mosley travels to Rome to normalize relationships between Italy and United Kingdom. The alliance with a powerful land power will permit UK to concentrate their efforts on the Navy, necessary to maintain the empire. Being closer to Germany, London will pursue a stronger policy of appeasement. On the 7th of March 1936, the Wehrmacht enters the Rhineland, contravening the Treaty of Versailles. March 1938, the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Germany, goes even smoother. August 1938, the Sudetenland are annexed to Germany. There will be not even the need of the Munich Conference. In the following months, Germany will take all Bohemia. Danzig, Prime Minister Mosley, does not give Poland a promise of unconditional support. France is unwilling to start a war only to protect Poland, and Poland isn't crazy enough to face Germany alone. Poland agrees to peaceful return Danzig to Germany. Being allied with the British, Germany, and Soviet Union, do not sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Without the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that included part of East Europe into the Soviet sphere, the Soviets will not risk to attack Finland, will not invade the Baltic states, and Bessarabia will remain to Romania. In July 1937, the Japanese restart the war with China. Britain supports China, fearing that a too powerful Japan could disturb their interests in Shanghai and southern China. Germany, too, has friendly relations with China, an important customer for German heavy industry and weapons. But things will change. Japan is a more modern and militarily powerful partner than China, more useful for Hitler's anti-Soviet plans. Hitler orders the stop the arms shipments to China and recalls the German military advisors who are aiding the Chinese army. In 1940, Japan signs the Axis Pact. It's a military alliance already signed by Rome and Berlin, in which the members are required to come to the defense of their allies if they are attacked. The friendship between Germany and Japan makes British more confident, and the relations between Japan and the United Kingdom improve. There will be an Anglo-Japanese non-aggression pact, similar to that proposed by Chamberlain in our timeline in 1936. British financial aid to China will be cancelled, forcing the US to increase it and causing a further estrangement between London and Washington. In 1940, the Britain of Mosley will sign the Axis Pact too, being the Axis Pact only a defensive pact. The Axis powers are now 4. In the following months, Hungary, Spain, Finland, Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia will sign it. Portugal and Greece, traditional British allies, will also adhere. Poland and Thailand will join it soon. The Axis alliance is born. The idea of a pact involving Britain, Germany, and Italy is not so absurd. In 1933, the Italian proposal of the Four-Power Pact, an alliance between Italy, UK, France, and Britain to ensure international security, was looked with interest. This alliance was refused by Hitler. Stalin orders to accelerate the plans to defend the western borders, since Germany had begun general conscription and has already amassed a gigantic army near the Polish border. Stalin believes that with Britain under a pro-German government and Poland into the Axis, a war is likely. And he is right. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, begins. Depicted as a preemptive strike, it sees the participation of Germany, Italy, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, Finland, Spain. After a few days, the United Kingdom enters the war, seen as a crusade against communism. A great worry to the British was the communism threatening their interests in Persia, and they were always willing to expand their influence in Central Asia. The Dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa will enter the war in the next weeks. Historically, they sided with the UK in all of her major conflicts since then. In the first stages of Operation Barbarossa, the Axis forces smashed through the Soviet defenses, entering in Soviet Union for hundreds of kilometers and capturing vast amounts of Soviet troops in territory while the Luftwaffe and RAF in full strength. The Battle of Britain didn't happen. Bombs and strafes the Red Army positions. For sure, in this situation, the Soviets know the attack will arrive, and they are more prepared. On the other side, in this situation, the Germans have not a Western front. There are the British, the Polish, and the Italian army that does not lost half of their best soldiers in Africa. So you could add to the Operation Barbarossa around 3 million personnel, at least 15,000 aircraft, 20,000 tanks, 30,000 artillery guns. Another advantage for the Axis: no naval blockade. The UK allows Germany to import all they need, first of all the oil. The British, Italian, German navies and air forces are also significantly more powerful than they were in our timeline because they haven't spent the last years while destroying each other. No breaking of the Enigma code. It was broken by the British and Polish that are now German allied. Within months, the Axis are only a few dozen kilometers from Moscow after capturing Kiev and surrounding Leningrad. Japan will not participate to the attack on Soviet Union. They will only blockade the port of Vladivostok. Most of the Japanese army is tied up in China. They don't have the manpower for another major land war. Further, the logistics to fight into Siberia would have been beyond Japan's capabilities, even with British oil. They already fought the Soviets in 1938 when they were defeated at Khalkhin Gol. The ferocity of the fighting had astonished the Japanese, thereby convincing itself that the Imperial Japanese Army, lacking heavy tanks and the like, is in position to challenge the Soviet Army. However, the Japanese remains a threat in the east for the Red Army. The Soviet Siberian divisions will remain in the east and will not participate to the battle for Moscow. Meanwhile, Roosevelt is watching what happens in the world, and he is worried. All Europe is under Axis influence. Japan is going to dominate the Pacific area. The British Empire, stronger than ever, control the rest of the world. He doesn't like all this very much. August 11, 1941, President Roosevelt signs the Lend-Lease Act that allows the United States to supply weapons free of charge to Soviet Union and China. Then the American embargo on Japan becomes even more severe. German, Italian, and Japanese assets are frozen in American banks. All Axis countries protest, considering the frozen of the assets as illegal and the Lend-Lease program as an American involvement in the war. Those measures, however, have little effect on the battlefront. Britain provides Japan at least part of the oil and raw material they need. Only a minimal part of the Lend-Lease arrived to Russia and China due to Royal Navy blockade, combined with Axis submarines patrolling every port entrance, the Italian fleet in the Mediterranean, and the Japanese fleet in the east. The Bering Strait is only 80 kilometers wide, but you cannot leave your materials on the beach. You have to take them to a port, but the main Soviet ports, Murmansk, Arkhangelsk, and Vladivostok, are blocked. Roosevelt thinks that let alone the Soviets, the only power that has a hope in hell to fight the Axis alliance, is not a great idea. The USA announced that consider the Axis blockade against the freedom of the seas. The U.S. Navy begins escorting Allied convoys near the Soviet ports. While the Royal Navy tries, when possible, to avoid a confrontation with the U.S. Navy, Kriegsmarine and Regia Marina don't have the same attitude. The Japanese even less. Incidents in the Atlantic and in the Pacific are frequent. Roosevelt orders American warships to attack Japanese navies to defend convoys if necessary, and refuses any agreement with Japan until they completely evacuate China. December 26, 1941. A Japanese naval force of 6 aircraft carriers under the command of Nagumo departs from the Kurili Islands and arrives near the Hawaii. January 7th, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. The attack leaves 8 American battleships out of action, killing more than 2,000 men. December 8th, the United States declare war on Japan. Hitler and Mussolini declare war on USA, considering USA as a Soviet ally. Mosley does not declare war on USA since Japan is an aggressor, so the Axis Pact is not valid, but they are fighting alongside Axis almost everywhere. The situations in which the Royal Navy and the US Navy come into contact are too frequent. January 20th, American B-25s sink an oil tanker near Nassau, Bahamas. February 3rd, the British fleet stops an American convoy in Norwegian waters. February 15th, a Japanese destroyer escorting a British convoy east of the Gilbert Islands is sunk by a USA naval force. The English ships return fire and a naval clash occurs with several losses. British public opinion, touched in pride by these continuous attacks, begins to support entry into war against that arrogant former colony. The English press portrays Americans as allies of communism, detailing the horrors of Stalin's regime. Mosley thinks that a war with USA is inevitable, and better to fight the USA now with strong allied at his side than in the future, alone. February 22nd, 1942. Great Britain of Mosley declares war on USA. South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand does not officially declare war on USA, but they announce that they will defend themselves against every attack. The British Empire enters the war. France is ruled by Pierre Laval. He is a fascist sympathizer but opposed to Germany. France won't suicide itself entering a war where it is completely encircled, impossible to win. Also, the UK wouldn't be happy to enter in a war against France, the last counterbalance present in the continent, and the English Channel's coasts are safer in the hand of France, less powerful than Germany. France will not enter the war. Canada immediately declares its neutrality in the war with USA, but Washington argues that if Russia falls, Nothing will stop the Axis alliance to march against the United States, and Canada will be the base for the invasion. The USA asked to occupy Halifax, Vancouver, and Newfoundland until the war ends. Canada can't accept such a request. February 28, 1942, USA declare war on Canada. In the following days, all the other Axis countries declare war on USA. The Second World War begins now, Axis and the British against USA and the Soviets. What are the forces on the field? This is the population. Gross domestic product, the money, it's what really matters when you fight a war. Consider that China will decrease rapidly. Other datas. In our timeline, Axis production dropped over years, but only because Germany was bombed night and day. Italy invaded, Japan destroyed, all of them under embargo. This situation is different, so we can suppose that the Axis military production will be greater. British industry, not bombed by the Luftwaffe, and without the siege of the U-boat, will perform better too. There are immediately the first clashes in the Atlantic between the U.S. fleet and the Royal Navy. There are even naval bombings against American ports: Portland, Boston, Norfolk, Savannah, Charleston. The Royal Navy is supported by the German U-boats and the battleships Bismarck and Tirpitz. The U.S. Navy attempts to disrupt traffic between Great Britain, Canada, and the colonies, but do not openly attack the British fleet, the strongest navy in the world. Apart from the numbers, the Royal Navy has the highest levels of skill, expertise, and overall capability, and the Imperial Japanese Navy has the best naval air power. The British also have a massive merchant navy, about a third of the world total. The British bombers S-29 Sterling based in Toronto bombed the USA industrial Midwest, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. U.S. Air Force retaliates on Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa. The B-24 is already in service, but in low numbers. There are the B-17S. The raids will initially target only military and industrial targets, but soon become unlimited. The American people will know what a bombing is. However, the damages to the USA industry is very limited. It took years and years of bombing to put down the German industry that was only a quarter of the USA industry. In the Pacific, the Japanese are advancing. The Japanese leaders hope that, as happened in 1905 against the Russian Empire, after a surprise attack, the USA would negotiate a compromise rather than fight a long war. The invasion of the Aleutian Islands begins. December 12th, the Japanese land on the Philippine Islands. Manila is captured in March 1942. MacArthur evacuates the Philippines. December 1941, the Japanese invade Wake Island and Guam. April 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea starts. It's the first battle in which aircraft carriers engage each other. The British fleet participates at this battle at the side of the Japanese. In this battle, the USA lose the aircraft carriers Lexington and the Yorktown.
January 1942, the Battle of Moscow is at its peak. Two pincer offensives, one to the north of Moscow by the 3rd and 4th Panzer Armies, and another to the south by the 2nd Panzer Army, while the 4th Army advances directly towards Moscow from the west. Even with British oil and the support of the RAF, the Axis has great logistical problems. They still relies on horses for the transports. Germany never had more than 6 million soldiers on the field, UK 4 million all around the world, Italy and Poland 1 million, while Red Army arrived to mobilize 20 million men. The entry of the Americans into the war distracts a part of the Axis forces sufficient to stop the German offensive. After weeks of intense combats at -30 degrees, the Soviets repel the attack on Moscow, but at a great cost. The Battle of Moscow bled them to the bone. They will not be able to start great offensives for years, as this would mean using a lot of soldiers for cannon fodder with the risk to lose the support from the population, as happened in WW2. Axis forces partially encircle Moscow, beginning another long siege as Leningrad. Spring 1942, the war plan red. The American invasion of Canada begins. The first U.S. Army assaults the port of Halifax. This is followed by an invasion on 3 fronts, from Vermont to take Montreal and Quebec, from the Midwest to capture the strategic nickel mines of Ontario, from North Dakota to seize Winnipeg. Vancouver is easily taken. It denies Britain and Japan a naval base and cuts Canada off from the Pacific Ocean. The USA invasion takes more than expected. The British had time to send reinforcements and prepare defenses. There are also contingents from other European nations. The Canadians are very strong soldiers. They are better armed and they can take advantage out of their terrain. The Canadians have 400,000 men with some very experienced units. For months, there are fightings in Quebec and Ontario. But the USA has vastly more men, tanks, and aircraft. There are the first Sherman tanks, and in a few months, there will be around 2 million men ready of the invasion. Montreal Falls in July, Ottawa and Toronto in August, then Halifax. The remaining Canadian forces withdrawn in Newfoundland and Labrador, then whatever possible are evacuated to Britain. In October 1942, the battle for Canada is over. Part of the Canadian Army moves to the far north where they will continue the war, supplied by the Royal Navy. June 1942, the Battle of Midway starts. Nimitz has positioned 3 aircraft carriers to ambush the Japanese. The British directly participate in this battle, making less effective the American decryptation of the Japanese naval code and correcting part of the errors of the Japanese Admiral Nagumo. The U.S. dive bombers sink the Japanese aircraft carriers Hiroyu and Soryu. The Japanese sink the aircraft carriers Enterprise and the Hornet. It's another defeat for USA, but the Midway invasion force is repulsed by the U.S. Marine garrison. Midway is heavily defended. There will be various approaches, especially from the British, to convince Mexico to enter the war on the Axis side. However, even if Mexico does not have good relations with the United States, their leader Camacho has even less with Germany and Italy, since his party of the Mexican Revolution is very close to the Soviet Union. Mexico will remain neutral. Conversely, Turkey will join Axis. The sole reason they refrained from joining in our timeline was the threat posed by the British that controlled Syria and Iraq. But in this timeline, Great Britain is allied with Germany. It isn't the case. From Turkey, it's easy to bomb Baku, where 80% of Soviet oil comes from, and attack the Caucasus, creating another front to the south. Persia too will enter the war. Persia was in the British spheres of influence, and the Reza Shah was quite close to Germany.
China will not last long. China is agrarian and poor. It's completely encircled, and without industrial infrastructure, oil, and resources. February 1943, the invasion of Jiangxi begins. In March of 1943, the Japanese take Changsha. The Chinese army collapses. Chiang Kai-shek escapes in Soviet Union, then in the USA. The Japanese create the Nationalist Government of China, a collaborationist government under Wang Jingwei. China remains in a chaotic situation. There's famine and violence everywhere. The Communist force in northern China waged a campaign of sabotage and guerrilla.
By 1943, the USA start a draft and rapidly convert their industrial capacity to war, beginning to produce out seemingly endless quantities of equipment, ships and planes, including the B-29. USA are in a sort of naval blockade. They can only trade with South America, but they have all they need for making weapons within their borders. The loss of 4 aircraft carriers is not a tragedy for the USA. There are 24 Essex-class aircraft carriers under production, and the USA will have about 100 carriers of various sizes within 2 years. No Lend-Lease means that the USA has about 30,000 planes, 26,000 tanks, and 600,000 other military vehicles more. Several American units will be moved in the East Russia, allowing the Siberian divisions to be redeployed near Moscow. The Bahamas and Jamaica are invaded in March 1943. May 1943. In the Pacific Ocean, the Battle of the Marshall Islands starts, and it will be a victory for USA. September 1943. The 503rd Parachute Regiment under MacArthur lands on Wake. The Japanese advance is stopped. The American productivity is rising, but the Axis one is rising too. The Axis essentially controls all the oceans, so they are able to trade with almost every country in the world and have access to the immense resources of the British Empire. There are no bombings over the Axis industries. Europe and Japan are out of the B-29 range. And even if it was in some way possible, the RAF and Luftwaffe combined are easily the most powerful air force in the world, making a bombing over London or Berlin from the American East cost a suicidal mission. The Germans will complete the construction of the Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier, as well the Italians their Aquila. The first prototype of the German Me-264 long-range bomber with a range of 15,000 kilometers flies on December 23, 1942. In the first months of 1943, starting from a base in Spain, there will be the first bombing of New York. However, it will only be a demonstration action, a sort of Doolittle raid that causes minor damage. The Me-264 will be used primarily to target Soviet factories in Siberia. There will be the resources to develop the jet fighter Me-262 before 1944. Britain and Germany will share their technical secrets, radar, rocket, and jet technology. Given all that, Axis, and in particular Germany and Britain, industrial potential is significantly bigger and are far stronger militarily and economically than they were in our period. At this point, someone in Washington will start to think to a kind of peace. Without France and with all of Europe under influence of the Axis, it's impossible for America to gain a foothold in the Old World. An Operation Overlord through an Atlantic dominated by Royal Navy and infested with German submarines would be decimated far before the landing. The situation of the Soviets is worsening. They lost most of the major food producer regions and population centers, and the Caucasus with all its oil. The German 6th Army and the 4th Panzer Army are approaching Stalingrad. After the victory in China, Japan will soon attack the Soviets in the east. Then the Germans will begin to focus more on their navies, and all Axis naval forces will be redeployed to the Pacific. If the Soviets fall, the war will become a sort of USA against the world. It's not a problem, but the death toll required to land in Japan, liberate China, defeat the British Empire, take control of Africa, and invade all Europe, driving the Germans out of Russia are in the order of many tens of millions of deaths, and nobody knows how many years. It took 5 years of furious fights only to defeat Germany, Italy, and Japan, and with the help of British, Soviets, France, China, and other 50 countries. The new Nazi weapons are worrying the American leadership, and there is the possibility that the Axis starts an invasion from Canada. It was not possible to eliminate the bridgehead in the north. The Axis leaders accept Roosevelt's request for an armistice. They are sure that in the long run they will win, but another 100 years war is not what they dream. There will be a sort of Yalta conference, why not in Versailles, in which the various spheres of influence will be defined. Central and South America are assigned to the USA. China is in the Japanese orbit, together with Mongolia, if only so as not to leave it to the Soviets. In Europe, only minimally affected by the war, there are territorial adjustments in the eastern part. Finland takes a large part of the Kola Peninsula. Romania gets parts of Ukraine, but loses Transylvania to Hungary. Part of the lands occupied by the Polish after the First World War returns to Germany. As compensation, Poland is moved east, gaining territories from the Soviets, as in our timeline moved west. Most of the European Russia is in the German sphere of influence. Their long-desired Lebensraum is now a reality. The English will have a piece of the pie. Part of the Caucasus may enter in the British sphere of influence. The Britain could also obtain something in China, perhaps Shanghai. The Philippines becomes an independent republic with José Laurel as president. The American troops will withdraw from Canada very slowly. World War II is over. Compared to our chronology, it caused many fewer deaths in Europe and Japan, but many more in China. Russia also had many deaths. US losses could approach 1 million, both civilian and military. The New World is divided in two blocks, Axis and the British on one side, USA and Russia on the other side. France, after Laval, needs an alliance with an anti-German function, so will move closer to this bloc. It's a world with a lot of tensions. Eastern Europe and Russia in particular are restless. Pro-German governments have little popular support. China is not at all pacified. The communist guerrilla war continues in the north and in the countryside. Several South American governments are ideologically close to fascism. So in the coming years, Americans will have to fight to maintain their influence in what they consider their backyard. The United States may find itself at a disadvantage compared to the Axis in military technology, particularly missiles and jet aircraft. The Holocaust. Without a harsh war and without the naval blockade, there will be less concentration camps. The Jews will leave Europe as it was before the war, mainly in the British Transjordan, causing disorders with the Arabs. Stalin will be deposed, then communism will end, and in Russia could rise some kind of authoritarian government. The Great Britain remains the world's leading superpower. The only English colony that will gain independence will be India, which will remain close to the British, at least until the 1960s. Canada was always more inclined to a better relationship with America, and having American troops at home, the new government remains close to USA. Australia and New Zealand instead will stay close to Great Britain. In our era, the British were not in position to help them that much, but USA supplied their troops and worked with them to defeat Japan. After the war, they realized that USA was a better choice for their defense. In this alternate history, however, a far stronger Britain, both militarily and economically, is seen as a reliable partner. This is the new world. It's not such a bad world.